Chapter 3.
So atherosclerosis is not usually a symptom. This is usually a problem which is detected when people go in and have a look at their eyes, and they look at the arteries at the back of the eyes, and the person says, "Ooh, you know, there's silver wiring, as it's called, in the eyes. This is an indication that you might have hardening of the arteries." Do you find difficulty in walking up hills? Oh yes, I have to stop. So they start to walk up hills, and then they get pain and they stop. And the pain usually is in the calf. It may be in other locations in the leg, or they may get a tightness in the chest. Not a full-blown angina at this particular time, but just a tightness of being able to breathe. They stop, and then they're okay for a minute, and then they go on for the next bit. And this is an indication they're not getting sufficient blood to those muscles which are exercising a lot. So the calf muscles, you know, are walking and using, we're all the time using our calf muscles. So when we restrict the blood flow, in other words, the oxygen delivery to the muscles there and the fuel, they go into cramp. And this is what you get. A lack of the oxygen produces the hypoxic type of reaction in the tissues. They may get a build-up of lactic acid in there as well. And this is called intermittent claudication, which is a variation on angina in the heart. Intermittent claudication is what it's called in the legs. And it's not necessarily a killer, but it does narrow the blood vessels down. So if they have a clot, a thrombotic clot forms, it may not be able to get down the tubes in the way that it used to. Okay, so they could suddenly keel over. And this is a problem which can be, in cases, terminal, and the first time, and totally symptomless. And we've all probably come across people like this. I came across a case last week when I was in Russia, a guy who has been on so many seminars over the 21 years. Dr. Schaefer and myself have been over there teaching, and we've known this guy, and he was 50, and just like that, had a heart attack. No symptoms at all before. They did an autopsy on him, naturally. 90% occlusion of his coronary arteries. 90%. No symptoms at all. And again, I heard a case of this in Australia a couple of years ago. Woman who was on the seminar, I said, "Oh, you look a bit down in the dumps." And she said, "Yeah, my husband died a few months ago." I said, "Oh, gosh." He was a vet, and he complained a bit about some backache, not caused by anything mechanical, but just some backache, and keeled over in the garden like that. Again, 90% occlusion. No symptoms. And I thought, well, we're missing something here, aren't we? There must be something that we can actually do about this, or to be able to detect this out. So I came up with a test for a silent heart attack. Okay, now I need a volunteer for this. So come on out. Okay. Now, lay yourself down there. Okay. I haven't victimized you, but I know you're red. I know he's red. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to test. Everybody knows the muscle associations, that they're aware that there are meridians, and every meridian has a muscle association that Dr. Goodhart developed, you know, some 40, 50 years ago now. Okay? And the muscle associated with the heart is the subscapularis muscle, and it's probably really, certainly in applied kinesia, the only muscle associated with the heart. So we don't have a vast number to choose from, which is nice when the heart meridian comes up, because you know then that it's going to be the subscapularis muscle. Now there's two parts to it. It comes from the inside the anterior surface of the scapula, and it's part of the rotator cuff muscles. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep the hand, the elbow to the side here, and we're going to keep the hand flat. Okay, so he's not tensing any more distal muscles there, and he's going to bring his hand towards his tummy, and that is directly rotating the hand immediately, which is testing the horizontal fibers, okay, of the subscapularis. Then we're going to take the arm up 90 degrees, take him into slight internal rotation, again the hand flat, and you push the hand towards the floor. Okay, good, so he's nice and strong there. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. So the left, in my concept of this, is that the left subscapularis refers to the left heart, left side of the heart. The horizontal fibers refer to the atrium, and the oblique fibers to the ventricle. Okay, so that's the way you do it. So the right subscapularis refers to the right heart. So you bring it into your tummy and then down to the floor. Okay, so he's nice and strong in all divisions on left and right. Okay, now what I want him to do now is, in his mind, is to climb up some stairs, something which makes you a bit tired. Do you do any exercise, any sport, anything?
Used to do a lot, not now more.
But not now. No. Okay. Can you just imagine a fairly long flight of stairs?
Okay.
Okay. You ever been at the Monument in London?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. Go to the bottom of the Monument in your mind. Okay. Okay. And very slowly now start to walk. Not in a stressful way, but just walk up the stairs. Okay. Start to put some exercise in there. Okay. Now pull the hand in towards your tummy. Good. And hand to the floor. Keep walking. Okay. Okay, hand in. Keep walking up those stairs and hand down. Okay. You're fine. Okay. Are you at the top of the Monument yet?
Yeah.
Not yet.
2 flights, 3 flights.
He's only 2 flights up. I thought he was going to say 2 stairs. Okay, that's fine. Right. So, a person who weakens, don't put it in a stressful way, because if a person has a real stress, they're imagining a real stress, they'll go weak anyway, okay? We don't want that. We just want to put them into an exercise position. And thinking about it has been shown to have the same physiological effect as actually doing it. Okay? You can actually visualize exercising, but it's very difficult to do for long enough to actually do any good aerobic-based building. But it has been shown that the very thought of doing exercise does stimulate the same chemicals. Okay? So rather than putting a person on a treadmill or making them climb the Monument and then testing the subscapularis, we just get him to visualize doing the exercise. So if you've got a person potentially like this, what you do is you test the subscapularis. They may be weak in the clear, in which case, you could do your usual thing. If it isn't, then put them in a stressful situation and then test the muscle. And in the potential problem, you'll find the muscle goes weak, but only one division of it. Okay? And that, to a clever person, will tell you whether it's ventricle or atrium, and you could even work out which our coronary artery is occluded. If you do weaken to this, then I beg you to do something about it. Okay? Now, not later, because you may not have a later. It can be just like that. And these 2 people had no symptoms. That was it. And we've probably all come across patients, haven't we, where you've heard of somebody dying very suddenly and yet seem to be quite healthy. You get it with footballers, don't you? Sometimes, sports people, they run, they play the sports, and you think fit person, and bang, just like that. And many of these, amazingly, you've got sort of such high occlusion, it's unbelievable that they haven't had symptoms, that they've adapted to that. But then something has happened, they've got a clot and bang, it's gone. So arteriosclerosis is basically a narrowing of the arteries, and this is due to a build-up of plaque. And the main enemy of this is oxidized cholesterol, which gets incorporated into the cell walls. So how do we oxidize cholesterol in the first way? We know cholesterol is in the cell membranes. Okay, we've said that already. But every cell in your body, including your blood vessels, has got cholesterol in the cell membranes. And cell membranes, or the cholesterol, becomes oxidized by free radicals, or reactive oxygen species. These are oxygen molecules with an extra electron on the outer orbit. So they're highly reactive substances. So they basically make oils go rancid. So when you smell a fish straight from the sea, it doesn't smell. The next day, it smells. And the day after, even when you kept it in the fridge, there's a certain amount. And that smell is the oils going rancid. Okay? So when cholesterol goes rancid, it doesn't smell in quite that same way. But it hardens the artery. And the death that occurs basically of the cell then allows calcium to go into that cell by apoptosis, as it's called, and then gradually we build up our calcium plaque inside. So we turn, if you like, from ordinary arteries into stone. Now the question is, why do we create the free radicals? And the reason is the reasons I've mentioned just earlier on. It can be due to foods that we eat, which create inflammatory responses. It can be due to the build-up of chemicals in the system, which have to be detoxified. And every time, every molecule of a toxin that we detoxify, we produce one molecule of superoxide radical. Or it could be a chronic infection. Okay? Now they've looked, you know, the pharmaceutical approach is, this is caused by an infection. Because if they can find an infection in there, they can give you an antibiotic or another remedy for it. Okay? So what we know is there's a real, and it's doing the rounds again, is this amazing discovery that you look at a person's teeth. And if a person's teeth are receding gums and they're bleeding, it could predispose to heart attacks. Okay? They've got an infection in their gums, and they've searched for this mysterious microbe, this bacteria. And of course there's bacteria in your gums, especially when your gums are receding. You get bacteria in there, and you can't get rid of the things because you lost your protection. But the bacteria is not the cause of the heart attack or the hardening of the artery. It's what I told you earlier. It's pyridoxal 5-phosphate or B6 deficiency. Okay? So when you look at a person's mouth, when you're looking here and the build-up of plaque and things, you're looking at the effects of pyridoxal 5-phosphate deficiency. Okay? And you'll find this in most of us, because most of us are going to get some disease if we don't modify that over the period of time. So natural medicines to avoid hardening of the artery. Vitamin E. Vitamin E has been shown to be a powerful antioxidant against free radicals. But the danger of vitamin E is it can actually become a radical itself. Okay? So you've got to actually, when the actual antioxidant effect of vitamin E makes it a pro-oxidant, and then that in turn somebody else has to take that extra electron. Otherwise vitamin E becomes a reactive oxygen species. So we need other antioxidants. So this is why antioxidants work better as a family rather than high doses of one of them. Okay? So vitamin E has its up points and its down points. Phosphatidylcholine, or in other words, lecithin, which we get from our good plant oils, our good quality oils, which we'll talk about later. So phosphatidylcholine is very important. That gets rid of the old cholesterol. Okay? It takes the old cholesterol away from the cells, takes it to the liver, converts it into bile. So getting the right oils into the system is very important. Okay? Probably half this nonsense about animal fats and things and cholesterol is not true. You know, Dr. Goodhart was one of the first to say you should actually eat animal fat. And he lived to 88, and he never had any heart problems in that sort of way. But getting good quality oils is important, not because they're low in cholesterol, but they actually help to form phospholipids in the body, and they take old cholesterol away and replace it with new. So oils are probably one of the most important things. Now we also know to avoid heart attacks and probably hardening of the arteries, we want to avoid trans fats. This is oils which are made from heated vegetable oils. So in the heating process, when a fatty acid chain gets to 100 degrees centigrade, it changes from being kinked at the dipole bond, into straightening out, and then it acts like a saturate and hardens the cellular membrane wall. But probably more important than even trans fats to avoiding those is to avoid rancid fats or oxidized fats. So oils should not be old. Okay? To store an oil, there's a real skill to this. Okay? And the worst thing to do is to store it in a glass bottle which is clear. Why? Because the main oxidizing substance or damaging to the oil to make it rancid is light. Okay? So oils should always be in dark bottles. If you buy oils in bulk in the Mediterranean, they're in cans, aren't they? Okay? So you buy them in a can. But as soon as you undo the can and titrate it into bottles, you're going to go rancid within a short space of time. And the more often you take the top off, of course, and put it on, you're allowing more oxygen to go in each time. So the most important thing is to not allow the light in, which is why they put them into dark brown bottles or other bottles. And especially, from our point of view, we put all our oils into mirror-on glass, so no visible spectrum light can go through there, apart from the extreme violet end. So plant oils are probably the most important thing to get in our diet to avoid cardiovascular problems. Okay, B3, zinc, B3, C, copper, O2. These are all very, very important again for breaking cholesterol down, particularly the oxidized there, turning it into bile. And of course iodine and selenium to help speed our metabolic rate up so we don't produce the cholesterol in the first place in too high amounts. So always challenge arteriosclerosis or hardening of the arteries with oxidized cholesterol. You won't get a result from cholesterol because cholesterol is a normal substance for these people. Again, what should you take? Cayenne pepper, very, very good as far as keeping the blood flowing, and garlic to thin any risk of any clots. Now, an extension of arteriosclerosis, when it occurs in the coronary vessels and causes symptoms in the heart, is called angina or angina pectoris. And again, same thing applies here, vitamin E. There were a couple of cardiologists in Canada in the 1960s, the Shute brothers they were called. They were the first to use vitamin E for treating angina and intermittent claudication. And in those days, when we were introduced to it in the 1970s, we knew nothing about muscle testing. That hadn't come into the country really. And so how you did it was you gave the person 100 international units of vitamin E for a week. And if they felt better, then you kept them on that. If they didn't, you put it to 200 for a week, 300 for a week. And then when you hit the number that reduced the symptoms, you stay with that for about 6 weeks, and then you cut it back and see when the pain came back on again, and then that was the optimal dose. So in other words, you built it up to what relieved the symptoms, held it there, and then tried to reduce it a little bit. So the majority of cases were sort of 400, 500, 600 international units or milligrams. Again, plant oils here and cayenne pepper. Very, very important. One of the best first aids is for them always to carry a bottle of cayenne pepper around and to use cayenne pepper because it's a vasodilator. It's one of the best things if a person feels an angina coming on, which potentially could go into a myocardial infarct, get cayenne pepper in. So when the dreaded one does come, and sometimes you've had people who say, I had a heart attack, and you think, well, have they really had a heart attack or just a transient sort of heart problem? And we had when I worked in the health hydro when I first qualified in 1970, the GP used to come in, we used to have long chats, and he used to do the cardiographs and things. And he said, I used to be involved with the post-mortems, autopsies on people with heart attacks. And he said, we very rarely found a clot. And he said it was amazing because everybody thinks it's a clot. And he said, we actually rarely found the clot, which is strange in the coronary vessels. He said they'd all got arteriosclerosis, as a precursor to the myocardial infarct. But he said most of them, the coronary vessels, were not only occluded, but in spasm. They were actually contracted. So it's a vasoconstriction. And this is often what people get as a heart attack, and I said, oh, you've had a mild heart attack. Like in the brain, it's called a transient ischemic attack. So you can get transient ischemic attacks in the heart. They're exercising a lot, and they can't get enough blood in, and that's called angina pectoris, but sometimes it will stay. And what happens is the heart vessels, and maybe the heart itself, being a muscle, goes into cramp. Okay? Now, you've all experienced cramp in your leg. You can imagine cramp in your heart. You don't live long with that. And he said that's what we find most often, is the vessels and the heart are gone into cramp. So what do we know about cramp and such conditions? Two key substances. One is water, isn't it? To stop cramping, stop the concentration of the buildup of lactic acid and things. But the other key ingredient is magnesium, isn't it? Okay. So magnesium dilates, calcium constricts. Okay, they found years ago that people in southern England had less heart attacks than people in northern England. And they thought, oh, this is a class thing, this is to do with the diet and so on. And then somebody said, no, it's to do with the water. The water is softer. If you go out to Manchester, we did a workshop up in Manchester, do you remember last December, I think it was, wasn't it? And you get the soap out and you're going to do the same thing that you do down here, and suddenly there's bubbles everywhere, isn't there? Because the water is so soft. And what they discovered is, they said, it's the calcium. There's lower calcium up there. Calcium is the good guy. But calcium is not the good guy. In fact, calcium is a constrictor. No way would high levels of calcium be good for you over and above the normal levels. It's the magnesium. So where there's calcium, there's always magnesium. Okay? So when calcium was lower naturally in the north, so was the magnesium. So although calcium is much higher down here, the magnesium is also higher in the water. Okay? So what we know is that you should have a good ratio of calcium to magnesium. Okay? And the best ratio is 2 to 1 or less. So 2 of calcium to 1 of magnesium. Okay? Can you read that? This is Hilden. This is just south of Andover, where I used to work. Okay? Now you tell us the figure there. This comes straight from a farm, and it's on pure chalk.
Calcium 97.
Calcium 97.
Magnesium 1.7.
Magnesium 1.7. And you pay how much for this stuff? This stuff is so expensive. It's one of the most expensive mineral waters because it's sold through very good shops in London, etc. But it's about one of the, let's say not one of the best waters around. So you can get very good waters. There's one great advantage of this water though, and that's it's in glass bottles, okay? Because most of the good waters, unfortunately, are in plastic bottles. So you may have noticed, you know, ones like Evian water, Volvic water, and Fiji water, you know, very good waters, extremely, you know, 2 to 1 or even less, much better waters, calcium to magnesium. But you may have noticed, I don't know whether you saw our Facebook on Epigenetics about Evian water, that they've gone over in the last 3 to 6 months to a new recyclable plastic. It's a very thin plastic. We think it contains bisphenol A, and it weakens every single person. And it's such a pity because it's a dang good water, but in the plastic bottle, it just leaks into the water. So be very careful of that because we've had a lot of people over the last few months with chronic guts problems, and nothing seems to touch this gut. And then they lose their appetite, they get anorexia, and in the end they can only really drink water comfortably. And of course, what are they drinking? They're drinking the water, and they can't understand. So they think it's something they've eaten, so they give that up, and you know it gives chronic pain. So beware of that. And it seems to be the harder plastic seems to be much better. It's the soft, and it's almost like a, you know, it's very very thin, and it must bend easily. And as it bends easily, it leaks. It gets creases in it, and the compounds leak out of it. So be very careful. If you go to patients with chronic abdominal problems, you know, just do a check on their water, particularly if they show up to chemical toxicity. It seems to be a problem. And it's not all bottles. If you go around the supermarket, you can squeeze them and see how tough the plastic is. The tougher the plastic, the better it is. Okay? So myocardial infarct. What can you do? Yeah, unfortunately, the patient's had it by the time you see them, of course. Not had the myocardial infarct. You don't usually have anybody come into the practice saying, oh, I think I'm going to have this. So cayenne pepper is one of the best things, of course, to continue to dilate. Now, to stimulate the prostacyclins, which help to break clots down in the system, garlic, ginger, and onions are very good. So these are easy things to incorporate epigenetically into your diet. So again, we're looking mainly at red people or people with a tendency to cardiovascular problem, history of it in the family. Eat plenty of garlic, onions, and ginger, and sprinkle the whole lot with cayenne pepper on the top. Okay? So that gives you a regular sort of supper to have. Magnesium, again, has been shown not only to be a vasodilator, whereas calcium constricts, but again, it stimulates prostacyclins, which help to break the clots down. CoQ10 has been shown to improve myocardial function, again, because of the last part of creating energy. Plant oils, as I say, to thin the blood, keep the cholesterol levels down, keep the arteries more supple, and vitamin E. Now, one of the things we know that the plant oils do this is that if you bend down to try and touch your toes, which we can do later on this afternoon, just to bend forward naturally, just the once there, and to measure how far you can get down the first time. Okay? And then you take your oils, the particular oils which are designed for your body type, for a month, and then do the same thing again. Don't do it every day, but do it every once a month or something, and go down, and you'll see incredible range of difference. You'll be that much more flexible. So literally, oils do make people more flexible. You know, when the patient comes in and says, oh, I'm really stiff, and you say, oh, you could do with a bit of an oil change, you know, they actually could do with an oil change. And it does make the tissues, and if it makes the tissues, then it's making the glue and the cells more elastic, okay? So the person has a greater range of movement. In fact, a colleague sent me a good couple of years ago a little article that if you sit and on the floor or the treatment table or the bed, and you then try to bend forwards with your fingers towards touching your toes, the less you can get towards your toes, the greater your risk of having a heart attack. Okay, so that's something we can do this afternoon. So you sit, you know, literally with your legs straight out on the floor, and then you bend forward to try and touch your toes, okay? And the greater the distance away, in other words, the stiffer you are, the greater the risk of a heart attack, because it means you lost your elasticity, and not only in your muscles, but in your blood vessels. So blood vessels which are hardened aren't elastic. Okay? So you can imagine stretching your femoral artery in here, and it not stretching. You know, there's a greater risk, obviously, of a heart attack. Very simple little things which we know about. So now you know bleeding teeth is not a good indicator there, and not being able to touch your toes. So who are we really designing this towards is the red person, isn't it? Okay, we've got to get the red person to modify the red person's expression of their genes. If we don't do that, then they're going to go headlong into that familial tendency. Or my father had a heart attack, or my uncle, or my mother. Okay, we've got to get to try and modify this, and we're going to modify it by a change of lifestyle, and maybe necessary to take a few things and to incorporate some good herbs and spices and things into the diet, and the right oils, of course. And that modifying of that genetic expression to make them the best that they can be is what epigenetics is all about. Okay? Are you looking for me at the back? You're okay as far as that. So I'd like to try and just finish these off. Yeah, okay. So the last one, I think it is, of the cardiac problems is called cardiac myopathy, which means a decrease in the muscle tone and power of the heart itself. So the heart is a muscle. Interestingly, it has to be exercised, you know, like any muscle, otherwise we lose its power. And we know that to produce energy in the heart, we have to produce ATP. And to produce ATP, we know we've got to have all the cycle here. We've got to have enough glucose coming in. We've got to have the glycolysis. We've got to have all those vitamin Bs of different descriptions. And we've got to have the CoQ10 at the end to make the electron transport system work to produce the maximum amount of ATP. So really what cardiac myopathy is an unexercised heart. In other words, it's not being exercised regularly as far as aerobic response, and it's failing in its production of energy in the tissue. So muscle, which the heart is, contains many more mitochondria than any other tissue in the body, apart from the brain. Okay? Now the brain is the number one with the number of mitochondria. Each neuron has hundreds of mitochondria. Most cells in your body only have one, okay? But the brain has hundreds, as do muscles. So muscles have less than the brain. So when you have a lack of energy, where do you see problems first? In the brain, okay? And secondly, you see it in the muscles. So the people are tired when they exercise, or if they can exercise, and they get brain fog. And many of these people have dizziness, okay, because the areas of the brain which operate our balance, called the vestibular mechanism, use more oxygen than anywhere else. And that prime area is called the cerebellum. And the cerebellum uses more energy. The cerebellum is called the small brain, okay? It's a little area at the back of the head there. It has more neurons than the whole of the rest of the cortex, okay? It's all crammed in. It's super concentrated, okay? That means it has more mitochondria and therefore uses more oxygen and needs more ATP. So the first symptoms of low ATP, low oxygen, is in the cerebellum, so the people feel off balance. Some people call that brain fog. They don't feel quite right in themselves, and there's all sorts of symptoms for it. It may be vertigo, etc. So cardiac myopathy is a lack of ATP in the muscle tissue there. So to stimulate that, we need all the things associated with the energy production, particularly the vitamin Bs, but we need the CoQ10 here. We may need a bit of vitamin E, but to get the CoQ10 as well, and the magnesium. Zinc, as we'll talk about, is very, very important for all tissue repair because of its action on DNA polymerase. And what is a good natural tonic that is available to do this is black walnut tincture. Now, black walnut tincture is made from the husk of the walnut and has been known for many years, like Crataegus or hawthorn, to strengthen the heart. Okay, it's a heart strengthener. So these are people who've got weak hearts and has cardiac myopathy. Now remember back when we talked about statin drugs and inhibiting farnesyl pyrophosphate, that was the problem, that if you end up on statin drugs, you end up with low levels of CoQ10. And so classically, this is the condition that people get who are on statin drugs who don't take CoQ10 alongside it. Okay? So the main reason for this is a lack of energy, and very often it's the CoQ10.
End of chapter 3.